They demanded a tally of surrender. We offered a lesson in accounting. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Human Confederation ship, reckoning the ship's name a promise she intended to keep. Before her, the main view screen was a tapestry of calm dread, the sapphire glow of the Kepler 186F star, the 5 defenseless civilian transports, huddled like frightened sheep, and the brutalist geometry of the Cthar Imperium blockade. A single crimson line of text pulsed at the bottom of the display, a digital heartbeat for 30,000 souls. Ultimatum expiration 58 minutes, 14 seconds. The demand was simple, delivered in a voice like grinding stone: surrender the system's newly discovered Neptunium deposits, or the convoy designated Stel Maru would be annihilated. Status Argo Rostova said, her voice a low anchor in the quiet hum of the bridge. The air tasted of ozone and recycled oxygen, a scent she had known for 20 years. Her fleet mind's holographic avatar materialized beside her command chair, a figure of cobalt light whose form was more suggestion than substance. No change, Admiral Argo replied, its synthesized voice smooth as polished chrome. The Cthar fleet holds its position in a classic scutum crux blockade formation. 37 cruisers, 4 heavy batteries. Their ultimatum is being broadcast on all system-wide channels. Rostova's gaze drifted to Tactical Officer Jian, whose fingers danced across her console, her face illuminated by the soft green glow. Their targeting locks on the convoy remained passive, but primed. Jian confirmed, without looking up. They are waiting for the clock to run out, Admiral. They expect us to break. Rostova felt the familiar vibration through the deck plates, the deep thrum of the Reckoning's zero-point reactor, holding steady. It was a feeling of immense power, held in deliberate, disciplined check. That was the human way, the principle her fleet was built upon. Teach first, fight only when forced. The Cthar only knew how to issue demands. They would learn a new kind of math today. A small icon blinked on Rostova's personal display, an incoming message from the convoy's lead transport, the Odyssey. It was a text-only burst, a plea from a civilian captain who knew he was out of his depth. Admiral, my daughter is on this ship. Please. Rostova closed the message, her jaw tightening. Every ship had a story, every soul a reason to live beyond this standoff. She would not let them become a rounding error in someone else's resource ledger. Helm, bring us to designation Amber, Rostova ordered. Hold a parallel course with the convoy just outside their weapon's optimal engagement range. Officer Boro, a man whose shoulders seemed as broad as the ship's hangar bay, nodded crisply. Aye, Admiral. Bringing us to Amber. The deck gave a slight shudder as the massive warship adjusted its vector, a controlled and graceful movement for a vessel that weighed 10 million tons. The Cthar doctrine was built on overwhelming force, following an inflexible ultimatum. They saw any negotiation as weakness, any posture but submission as a trigger for violence. They believed the universe bent to the loudest voice. Rostova's fleet was here to teach them about resonance, about echoes, about the way a single well-placed whisper could shatter a shout. Argo, run projection model 7 Gamma one more time, she commanded. I want to be certain about the energy cascade timings. The AI's avatar shimmered. Already running, Admiral. The probability of success remains at 87.4% contingent on Cthar adherence to their own documented tactical doctrine. That was the linchpin of her entire strategy, the enemy's rigid predictability. It was their greatest strength, and if she played this right, their most fatal flaw. They've never encountered a mirror lattice formation before. Jian noted a spark of confidence in her tone. Their threat assessment libraries will have no precedent. Rostova nodded, a grim smile touching her lips. That's the point, Lieutenant. We're not just breaking a blockade. We are editing their textbooks. She keyed her comms. All ships, this is the Admiral. Stand by to deploy the net. On my mark. This was not a battle. It was a reflection. Inside the medical bay of the Odyssey, a young girl named Ilara drew pictures on a datapad. She sketched a huge, friendly-looking ship with shields like butterfly wings protecting 5 smaller ships from a fleet of angry, jagged triangles. Her father, the convoy's chief engineer, watched her from across the small cabin, his face a mask of forced calm. He could feel the low-frequency hum of the distant Cathar engines through the hull, a constant predatory reminder of the timer ticking away on the bridge. He had promised Ilara they would see the crimson forests of Kepler 186f together. He prayed the faraway Confederation admiral would help him keep it. The Cathar prelate. Vorn watched his tactical display from the bridge of the Imperator's will. The human flagship was moving a slow, almost insolent crawl. He sneered. It was a pathetic gesture, a desperate attempt to appear intimidating. His doctrine was clear-tested across 100 conquered systems. Issue an ultimatum from a position of unassailable strength. Punish any deviation without mercy. The humans had been given their choice. Their vessel's name, Reckoning, was an irony he found particularly amusing. They are broadcasting wide-spectrum sensor pings. Prelate, his tactical officer, reported his voice flat, with professional disinterest. Standard reconnaissance patterns. Vorn waved a dismissive hand. Let them look. Let them see the hammer poised to fall. He had 37 cruisers ready to fire. The human fleet consisted of the flagship, 4 destroyers, and 6 frigates. The math was simple. The outcome was preordained. The humans would break or they would burn. Their arrogance was a calculable variable. On the Reckoning's bridge, Rostova felt the tension ratchet tighter. The ship's internal atmosphere scrubbers hissed softly, a sound that usually went unnoticed, but now seemed loud in the charged silence. Argo. What is Vorn seeing right now? She asked. The AI's avatar gestured toward the main screen, overlaying it with a wireframe schematic. He sees us as we are, Admiral. He is interpreting our approach as a prelude to a desperate suicidal charge. He likely anticipates a standard kinetic or energy weapon exchange. Good, Rostova said. Let him think we're fools. Let him believe his ledger only has 1 column. She looked at Jian. Tactical are the lattice emitters. Charged, Jian's eyes were fixed on her board, her expression one of intense focus. Emitters are green across the board. The net is stable and ready for projection. We're just waiting on your command to cast it. The mirror lattice was the crown jewel of Confederation defensive technology, a system born from a philosophy of redirection rather than destruction. It was not a weapon. It was an argument. Helm, bring us to red alert. All hands brace for engagement. Rostova's voice rang with newfound authority. Jian, on my mark, cast the net. Target the primary Cathar cruiser line. She took a deep breath, the recycled air feeling cool in her lungs. The countdown timer now read 42 minutes, 8 seconds. It was time to open the book and begin the lesson. We would hold the line with light itself. Mark Rostova's command cut through the silence. Execute. Jian's hands flew across her console, casting the net. Emitters firing. Lattice projection is live. Outside the ship, a silent, beautiful, and terrifying event unfolded. From specialized projectors on the hulls of the Reckoning and its escort frigates, a shimmering field of coherent light and manipulated space-time expanded with impossible speed. It was not a shield. It was a mirror 1,000 kilometers wide, a complex, multi-layered array that could absorb, replicate, and redirect sensor signatures with perfect fidelity. The Cathar bridge crew flinched as their tactical displays suddenly flooded with new contacts. Where there had been 1 human fleet, there were now 3. Two identical ghost fleets shimmered into existence on Vorn's screen, perfect mirror images of Rostova's formation, flanking his own ships in an impossible pincer movement. "Report," Vorn snarled, rising from his command throne. "What is this trickery?" His sensor officer stammered, his claws clicking nervously on his console. "Prelate, the signatures are perfect. Energy profiles, mass readings. They are identical to the real ships. I cannot differentiate." Their certainty became their cage. "It's a decoy." Vorn spat, though a sliver of doubt had pierced his doctrinal armor. A sophisticated one, but a decoy nonetheless. "All ships open fire on the central group. That is the true enemy. Eradicate them." On the reckoning, alarms blared. "Incoming fire," Jian shouted. "They took the bait. They're firing on our real position." Rostova's knuckles were white where she gripped her command chair. The console in front of her showed the incoming energy bolts, streams of angry plasma that would tear her fleet apart. "Argo, are we ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt in her bones. "The lattice is synchronized, Admiral," the AI confirmed, "ready to reflect on your command." This was the true genius of the mirror lattice. It didn't just create illusions. It could turn an enemy's attack back on itself. The incoming plasma bolts were seconds away. Rostova watched the tactical plot, her heart pounding in time with the proximity alerts. The civilian transports were beginning their burn, accelerating toward the gap her maneuver was designed to create. It all came down to this moment. Brace for the echo of their own rage. "Reflect," Rostova commanded. All emitters full power. Jian slammed her palm onto a master control. Reflection angle set. Engaging now. The mirror lattice, which had been passively projecting ghost images, now actively reconfigured its energy matrix. The incoming Cathar plasma bolts struck the shimmering invisible field. For a fraction of a second, the space in front of the human fleet burned with the light of a small star. Then the universe seemed to pivot. The energy was not blocked or absorbed. It was caught, contained, and redirected. The Cathar sailors watched in disbelief as their own barrage of plasma, perfectly preserved, was hurled back at them. The attack sliced into the flank of Vorn's own cruiser line, striking two of his ships before they could raise their shields to full power. Explosions blossomed in the silent vacuum of space puffs of incandescent gas and shattered hull plating where moments before there had been warships. The chaos on Vorn's bridge was immediate. "Report. Damage. Report." Vorn roared, his composure finally cracking. What just happened? His tactical officer was staring at his screen, his mandibles agape. "Prelate. They didn't fire. They sent our own weapons back at us. It's impossible." The Cathar had built their empire on the simple principle of applying overwhelming force. They had never conceived of an enemy who would use their own strength against them. They had no protocol for this. The ledger had been opened. A cheer erupted on the Reckoning's bridge. "Direct hits," Jian yelled, a grin spreading across her face. "Two Cathar cruisers are crippled, venting plasma. Their line is in disarray." Rostova allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction before her focus snapped back. "What's the status of the convoy?" Officer Boro answered, his voice thick with relief. "They're clearing the blockade zone, Admiral. The path is open. They're going to make it." A wave of relief washed over Rostova, so potent it almost made her knees weak. But it wasn't over. The cost of the maneuver was already making itself known. Admiral Jian reported, her tone shifting back to business. "The Steadfast and the Agincourt are reporting heat damage to their lattice emitters. They pushed them past the red line to manage the reflection." On the main screen, Rostova could see the two frigates glowing with residual energy, their heat sinks working overtime to prevent a reactor breach. "And we have a medical report from the Steadfast. A power surge from the emitter coil blew back into the engineering deck. One wounded Chief Petty Officer Thorne. Burns to his arms and face, but he'll live. Rostova logged the cost in her mind. A victory was not a victory if you forgot the price. They paid in steel, we paid in sweat and scars. On the Imperator's will. Prelate. Vorn stared at the tactical display. The human fleet had not moved to pursue. They held their position, a silent, disciplined line. The two ghost fleets created by their mirror lattice had vanished, the trick complete. The civilian ships were escaping. He had been humiliated. His unassailable doctrine had been fractured by a tactic he could not comprehend. His rage was a physical thing, a burning furnace in his chest. He had issued an ultimatum, and they had answered with mockery. This could not stand. His authority and the very foundation of the Cathar Imperium's power rested on the absolute certainty of their threats. If that certainty was questioned, the entire edifice could crumble. Helm, he growled, his voice a low threat. Bring us about. Send a message to the human admiral. The terms have changed. His tactical officer looked at him confused. Prelate. The convoy is gone. What are our new terms? Vorn's eyes were fixed on the image of the HCS reckoning. The ultimatum is no longer about the planet's resources. The new ultimatum is this unconditional surrender of her fleet. If she refuses, I will sterilize the fifth planet in this system from orbit. She has 1 hour to choose between her pride and 10 billion lives. Their doctrine did not allow for defeat, only escalation. The message arrived on the Reckoning's bridge like a physical blow. Gian read it aloud, her voice tight with disbelief and anger. He's targeting the planet now, Kepler 186F. It's a fully developed world, billions of civilians. Boro slammed a fist against his console. That's monstrous. We let the convoy go, we won the engagement. This is just spite. Rostova listened, her face impassive, but inside a cold fury was building. This was the true face of the ultimatum doctrine. When its logic failed, it fell back on pure, unadulterated terror. Argo, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Calculate the probability of Vorn following through on his threat. The AI's avatar flickered. Based on 114 documented Cathar ultimatums, when a prelate's initial terms are successfully defied, they escalate to a planetary threat in 98.9% of cases. They carry out that threat in 91% of those instances if their new terms are not met. The probability is high, Admiral. Rostova looked at the countdown timer, now reset. Ultimatum expiration, 59 minutes, 51 seconds. This was the escalation she had feared, but also anticipated. Vorn had lost the tactical engagement and had immediately shifted the conflict to a moral one, betting she would not sacrifice a planet for her ships. He was trying to force her into an unwinnable choice. He's trying to put us on the collar, she murmured. It was an old confederation, saying dating back to when fleet doctrine was first being forged. It meant being forced into a position where every choice was a betrayal of your own principles. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars, Admiral. What are your orders? Gian asked, her eyes searching Rostova's face for a sign for a path forward. Rostova looked from the tactical display to the serene blue-green marble of Kepler 186F on the view screen. 10 billion people were going about their day unaware that their world had just been placed on a butcher's block. Her own principles were clear: you do not sacrifice civilians. But surrender was not an option either. Surrendering her fleet would not save the next system Vorn decided to threaten, or the one after that. It would only validate his doctrine of terror. We do not break, we do not bend, we calculate. Argo Rostova began a new hard edge to her voice. Vorn believes he has created a trap with only 2 exits, both of them his. I want you to find a third. The AI's blue form became still, its internal processes running at near total capacity. The low hum of the bridge was the only sound for a full 10 seconds. Coolant hissed somewhere in the ceiling panels. I have analyzed 3.4 trillion strategic permutations, Admiral Argo finally said. There is a path. It is unconventional. The risk of failure is 62%. The risk to this fleet is substantial. Rostova met the AI's gaze. The alternative is 100% risk to that planet. Tell me the plan. Argo's avatar projected a new schematic onto the main screen. It showed the system's star, the planet, the Cthar fleet, and her own. Then a series of lines and vectors began to appear, forming a plan of breathtaking audacity. It was not a defensive maneuver. It was an attack, but one that relied on turning the entire system into a weapon against the Cthar. Vorn thinks we see the planet as a hostage, Rostova said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face as she understood the AI's logic. We need to teach him to see it as a fortress. The plan was elegant, terrifying, and beautiful. It involved using the planet's own magnetosphere as a massive energy lens and her fleet's mirror lattice not as a shield, but as a focusing tool. It was a move of such colossal scale that no one in their right mind would ever attempt it, which is precisely why it might work against an enemy as doctrinally rigid as Vorn. The universe provides its own weapons if you know how to listen. He's given us an hour, Rostova said, turning to her crew. We'll only need 30 minutes. The mood on the bridge shifted. The shock and anger were replaced by a cold, focused resolve. They had a plan. They had a chance. Jian, I need precise energy calculations for the magnetosphere's bow shock. Boro, plot a course. A very specific one. We're going to hide in Vorn's shadow. The officers nodded, their fingers flying across their consoles, translating the AI's theoretical strategy into concrete commands. The plan was a gamble of cosmic proportions. The first step was deception. Rostova had to make Vorn believe she was paralyzed by his ultimatum, that she was debating surrender. She needed him to stay exactly where he was confident in his victory. Open a channel to the Imperator's will, she ordered. Audio only. Let me speak to the prelate. A moment later, the Cthar's harsh, grating voice filled the bridge. Have you come to your senses, Admiral? Will you surrender your ships, or will you be remembered as the butcher of Kepler? 86. Rostova took a breath, letting a carefully crafted note of weariness and desperation enter her voice. Prelate Vorn, your terms are severe. I have the lives of my crew to consider, and the lives of those on the planet. I require time to deliberate this. She had to sound like a defeated commander, not a predator setting a trap. She could feel Jian and Boro watching her, understanding the game she was playing. The deception was critical. If Vorn suspected anything, he would move, and the delicate geometry of Argo's plan would shatter. A defeat is only a defeat if you accept the definition. Vorn's laugh was a burst of static and contempt. Deliberate. Your choice is simple: obedience or oblivion. You have 52 minutes, Admiral. Do not waste my time again. The channel cut. He bought it, Boro murmured. The arrogant son of a bitch, he bought it. Rostova nodded. His pride is the most powerful weapon we have. He won't move. He wants us to sweat. She turned her attention back to the tactical plot. Argo, begin Phase 1. Let's start turning this system inside out. The Reckoning and its escorts began a slow, subtle burn, changing their position relative to the planet and the Cthar fleet. It was a maneuver designed to look like a nervous, indecisive patrol. In reality, it was the first step in a celestial dance of immense precision. They were moving into the planet's magnetic tail, the one place Vorn would never expect them to go. It was a region of intense radiation and sensor distortion, a place most commanders would avoid at all costs. But for their plan, it was the perfect hiding spot. The hum of the ship's reactor deepened, a tangible sign of the power being diverted to the engines and the lattice emitters. A faint scent of hot metal, a consequence of running the environmental systems near their limit to compensate for the radiation, permeated the bridge. The stakes had been raised from a convoy of 30,000 to a world of 10 billion. The cost of failure was now unthinkable. Rostova felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, a familiar burden she had carried for her entire career. Sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to become terrifying. In a quiet crew mess hall deep within the reckoning, two off-duty engineers shared a ration pack. One was young on his first tour. The other was a veteran of a dozen campaigns. "You think the Admiral will surrender the young one?" asked his voice barely a whisper. The veteran shook his head slowly, taking a sip of his nutrient paste. "Not a chance," he said. "I've served with her for 10 years. She doesn't know the meaning of the word. But she doesn't fight stupid either. Right now, she's not panicking. She's teaching." The younger man looked confused. "Teaching who? The Cathar?" The veteran smiled. "Them, sure. But mostly she's teaching the universe that humanity's line is not for sale. Not for a convoy. Not for a planet. Not for anything." He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from years of fixing conduits and patching hull breaches. "There are things you don't bargain with. You just hold. The anchor of conviction holds the fleet steady." The human fleet slipped into the planet's magnetotail. The main view screen shimmered with auroral light as charged particles from the star were whipped around them by the powerful magnetic field. Cathar sensors, already primitive by Confederation standards, would be completely blind to them here. It was like hiding in the heart of a storm. "We are in position," Admiral Boro reported, his voice tight with tension. "We are shielded from their view." "Jian's status of the lattice?" Rostova asked. "The emitters are recalibrating to handle the ambient radiation," she replied. "It's tricky, but we can do it. We can turn the entire magnetosphere into a focusing lens. But Admiral, the power required will drain our core to 30%. We'll be almost defenseless after the shot." Rostova knew the risk. It was an all-or-nothing gambit. If it failed, they would be adrift in a radiation belt with a furious Cathar fleet waiting for them. "Argo, are we certain the Cathar fleet's shield harmonics are susceptible to this?" she asked, seeking final confirmation. "The probability remains high, Admiral," the AI stated. "Their shields are designed to repel discrete, high-energy impacts. They are not configured to handle a sustained system-wide cascade of focused stellar particles. To their shields, it will feel like the star itself is reaching out to touch them. A weapon forged from a star, a planet, and an enemy's own ignorance." It was the most audacious strategy she had ever conceived. "They built a wall. We are going to build a wave." "Vorn thinks he's the storm," Rostova said softly, more to herself than to her crew. "He's about to find out what a real one looks like." She watched the countdown timer. 34 minutes, 19 seconds. They were well ahead of schedule. Now came the hardest part, the waiting. They needed to let the Cathar prelate sit and simmer in his own certainty, to let his arrogance build to a crescendo. The longer he believed he was in control, the more devastating the reversal would be. On the bridge of the Imperator's will, Vorn was growing impatient. The humans had not communicated further. His tactical officer reported that their ships were on a slow, erratic patrol pattern. They looked like confused animals caught in a trap. "They are cowards," Vorn declared to his bridge crew. They are weighing their pathetic lives against their duty, but their sentimentality will be their undoing. They will surrender. It is the only logical outcome. His officers murmured in agreement. The doctrine was as always flawless. He imagined the human admiral sweating on her bridge torn between her orders and her emotions. The image pleased him. The core of the Cathar Imperium's philosophy was the rejection of such weakness. Emotion was a variable that led to miscalculation. Logic, cold and absolute, was the only path to victory. He had presented the human with a logical problem. She had no choice but to arrive at the solution he had dictated. Their logic was a straight line in a curved universe. Admiral Argo's voice cut through the quiet tension on the Reckoning's bridge. I am detecting a significant energy surge from the Cathar flagship. Prelate Vorn is charging his primary weapon. Jian's head snapped up from her console. He's not waiting for the deadline. He's going to fire on the planet now. The color drained from Boro's face. Why, he still has half an hour. Rostova's eyes narrowed. It was a classic ultimatum tactic, demonstrate a willingness to act before the deadline expires to heighten the psychological pressure. He isn't firing, Rostova said calmly, her mind racing. He's putting on a show. It's a threat display meant to force my hand. He's powering up his weapon to aim it at the planet, to make the threat feel more real. She looked at Argo. Is the magnetosphere lens ready? The AI's avatar gave a single sharp nod. The lattice is fully integrated with the planetary magnetic field. We can fire at any time. The moment of decision was upon her. Her initial plan to wait was no longer viable. Vorn's escalation, intended to force her surrender, had instead just shortened his own lifespan. He just handed us our trigger, she said. He thinks he's aiming a gun at a hostage. He doesn't realize the hostage is the one holding the detonator. She stood up from her command chair, her posture radiating a certainty that flowed through the entire crew. This was the pivot point, the moment the trap would be sprung. They thought they were writing the ending. They were only finishing the preface. All hands, this is the Admiral, her voice was broadcast throughout the fleet. The Cathar prelate has chosen to escalate. So have we. Stand by to reroute all non-essential power to the lattice emitters. On my mark, we will show him what happens when you threaten a human world. A deep resonant hum began to build throughout the Reckoning, the sound of a warship gathering its full and terrible strength. The lights on the bridge dimmed as power was shunted to the ship's primary systems. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the tactical display, on the angry red icon of the Imperator's will charging its planet-killer weapon. Jian, target their flagship. I want to settle the main account first. Aye, Admiral. Targeting the flagship. The lens is focused. The air on the bridge was electric thick with anticipation. Years of training, generations of doctrine, all came down to this single unprecedented act. They were about to weaponize a planet's soul against an invader. Argo Rostova said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Open the ledger. They are about to learn the true meaning of reckoning. Mark, the command was sharp, absolute. Jian's hands moved with practiced grace, executing the final command sequence. The mirror lattice hidden with the fleet deep inside the magnetotail did not fire a weapon. It simply opened a gate. It reconfigured the planet's entire magnetic field, turning the bow shock, the area where the field met the solar wind, into a giant, invisible satellite dish. This dish gathered the ferocious stream of stellar particles pouring from the Kepler 186 star and focused it. It focused it into a single concentrated beam of pure solar energy, a river of raw stellar fury, 1,000 kilometers wide. The beam was invisible to the naked eye, a silent torrent of radiation and charged particles. It moved at a significant fraction of the speed of light, crossing the distance to the Cathar fleet in less than 2 seconds. It was not an explosion. It was an erasure. On the bridge of the Imperator's will, the last thing Prelate Vorn saw was his shield indicator, turning from green to a piercing, impossible white. His tactical officer had just opened his mouth to scream a warning when the wave hit. The ship's shields, designed for pinpoint impacts, flared and died in less than a millisecond, overloaded by a tide of energy they were never meant to withstand. The focused solar wind stripped the vessel's hull like a sandblaster, superheating the outer layers to incandescent plasma. The flagship and the 6 cruisers closest to it were vaporized. One moment they were there, brutal and menacing. The next, they were expanding clouds of superheated gas, their reactors going critical in a series of silent secondary detonations that looked like camera flashes in the void. The rest of the Cathar fleet, positioned further back, was savaged. Their shields collapsed, their hulls were scorched, and their sensor arrays were fried into slag. The entire Scutum Crux formation, the very picture of arrogant power, was broken and scattered in the space of 3 seconds. Their ultimatum had been answered by the star itself. Silence reigned on the Reckoning's bridge. The crew stared at the view screen, at the ghostly expanding clouds of debris where the heart of the Cathar fleet had been. The sheer overwhelming success of the maneuver was stunning. Status report. Rostova said, her voice a low command that cut through the awe. Gian swallowed hard, her eyes wide. The Cathar flagship is gone, Admiral. 6 cruisers confirmed destroyed. At least 12 others are reporting critical damage venting atmosphere. Their formation is... It's gone. The trap worked. Boro breathed, sinking back into his chair. The trap worked. The cost of the maneuver was immediate. The lights on the bridge flickered as the Reckoning's reactor struggled to compensate for the massive power drain. Core power is at 29%, Argo reported calmly. Lattice emitters are offline for immediate recharge. Fleet-wide energy reserves are critical. We are vulnerable. They had fired their one and only shot. But it had been enough. The remaining Cathar ships were in chaos. They were not firing back. They were broadcasting desperate, confused distress calls. Their rigid doctrine had no contingency for this kind of event. Their prelate was gone, their command structure shattered. They had come to dictate terms and had been met with a physics lesson they had not known existed. This was the moment the balance shifted. Rostova watched the unfolding chaos for a long moment. Her fury had been spent in the single decisive act. Now her training took over. The lesson was not over. The most important part was yet to come. Argo, she said, her voice regaining its steady, measured tone. Open a fleet-wide channel to all remaining Cathar vessels. Patch it through the system's emergency broadcast network. I want everyone to hear this. The civilians on the planet, the survivors of the convoy, and every single Cathar sailor who is still alive. Channel open. Admiral Argo confirmed. Rostova stood tall, the weight of 10 billion lives settling not as a burden, but as a mantle of responsibility. She looked into the camera pickup, her gaze as unyielding as the void itself. This is Admiral Ava Rostova of the Human Confederation Fleet. You came to this system to enforce an ultimatum. You were prepared to take life to claim resources. Your prelate threatened a world to salvage his pride. Her voice was calm, not triumphant. It was the voice of a teacher, not a conqueror. What you have just witnessed was not an act of war. It was a consequence. It was the result of a calculation you failed to make. She paused, letting the words sink in across the shattered remnants of the enemy fleet. We did not fire a single weapon. We simply held up a mirror and allowed the universe to respond to your aggression. This is the human way. We do not seek conflict, but we will not suffer threats, and we will not bargain with those who use terror as their currency. Their defeat was not in the explosion, but in the realization. A new choice has been entered into your ledger. Rostova continued, her voice echoing across the silent void. You can hold on to your broken doctrine and follow your prelate into oblivion. Or you can accept this lesson, disengage, and return to your Imperium with a message: humanity's space is not a resource to be claimed. It is a community to be respected. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes boring into the camera. You have 10 minutes to begin your withdrawal. After that, I will consider your presence here a renewed declaration of war, and I will act accordingly. The choice is yours. She cut the transmission. The bridge of the reckoning was deathly quiet. Jian stared at her, a look of profound respect on her face. Admiral, our core is at 28%. We can't fight them if they call our bluff. Rostova walked back to her command chair, the deck plates feeling solid beneath her boots. It's not a bluff, Lieutenant. It's a statement of fact. If they choose to die here, we will accommodate them. Argo, what is the status of their command structure? The AI's avatar shimmered, processing the chaotic Cathar communications. Indeterminate, Admiral. I am isolating over 300 unique command rank signifiers broadcasting contradictory orders. Their chain of command has been decapitated. They are floundering. A wounded animal is at its most dangerous. Rostova knew this. An enemy without a clear leader could devolve into a swarm of panicked, vengeful actors. The next 10 minutes would be the most dangerous of the entire engagement. She had offered them a bridge to survival, but Cathar pride was a powerful, self-destructive force. She could only hope that the lesson she had just delivered had been clear enough to overcome it. Their pride was the final enemy to defeat. On the bridge of the Cathar cruiser, Vindicator Sub-Prelate, Kale stared at the debris field that had once been his command squadron. He was the highest-ranking officer left alive. Vorn's arrogance had led them into this meat grinder. He had seen it. He had questioned the prelate's rigid adherence to doctrine in private, and now that doctrine lay in ruins scattered across the system as radioactive dust. The human's message had been broadcast across his own ship's comms. His crew was looking at him, their faces a mixture of fear, rage, and confusion. Sub-Prelate, what are your orders? His tactical officer asked, his voice trembling. Do we avenge the prelate? Do we charge them? Kale looked at the tactical display. His own ship was damaged, its shields flickering at 40%. Half the fleet was crippled. The humans, though their energy signatures were low, were undamaged. They had used a weapon he couldn't comprehend, a force of nature turned against them. To charge now would be suicide. But to retreat would be an admission of failure unheard of in the Cathar Imperium. He was trapped between a shameful life and an honorable death. Kale knew what the doctrine demanded. It demanded a glorious final charge. It demanded they die for the honor of the Imperium. But he also saw the faces of his crew, young sailors who had trusted their leaders to guide them, not to slaughter them. He saw the cold, undeniable logic of the humans' actions. They hadn't gloated. They had instructed. It was infuriating, humiliating, and undeniably effective. Hold your position, Kale commanded, his voice finding a strength he didn't know he possessed. Broadcast to all surviving Cathar vessels, this is Sub-Prelate Kael. I am assuming command of this fleet. The message rippled through the battered Cathar ships. A single point of authority began to emerge from the chaos. On the reckoning, Argo immediately flagged the transmission. Admiral, a new command voice has emerged. A Sub-Prelate Kael has taken control. Rostova's eyes narrowed. Analysis Argo. Who is he? The AI processed the available data. Kale's record is sparse. He is young, promoted quickly. He has no recorded ultimatums under his personal command. He is an unknown variable. This was the moment of truth. An unknown variable was more dangerous than a predictable fool like Vorn. "What is he doing?" Rostova asked. Jian answered, her eyes locked on her screen. He's rallying them, Admiral. He's pulling the damaged ships into a defensive formation. He's not charging. But he's not retreating either. The 10-minute deadline was ticking away. Kale was testing her. He was calling her bluff, betting she wouldn't fire on a fleet that was making no aggressive moves. He was learning, and that made him far more dangerous. A new message came from Kale's ship, this time directed only at the Reckoning. It was not a surrender. It was a demand of his own. "Human Admiral, you speak of lessons and choices. You have destroyed my commander and crippled my fleet using a forbidden power. By our law, this blood debt must be answered. You demand we withdraw. I demand a tally. One of your ships, surrendered to us as recompense for our losses. Only then will the ledger be balanced." Boro swore under his breath. "Recompense, he wants one of our ships after they threatened a planet." Rostova held up a hand for silence. Kale's move was brilliant in its own way. He was not threatening more violence. He was adopting her own language of ledgers and accounting, twisting it to fit his culture's demand for honor and retribution. He knew she couldn't accept, but it reframed him from a defeated commander into one negotiating terms. It was a political move designed for his own crews. He was giving them a cause to rally around that wasn't a suicide charge. "He's not stupid," Rostova said, a note of grudging respect in her voice. "He knows we'll refuse. This isn't for us. This is for his own people to show them he is not a coward. He's creating a pretext." The countdown timer reached 0. The Cathar fleet had not withdrawn. They floated in the void, a wounded but defiant wolf pack. The bluff had been called. The account was still open. Admiral Jian said, her voice taut. "Our core is back to 35%. The emitters are still cold." Rostova's mind was a whirlwind of calculation. She could not attack an enemy who was holding a defensive posture. That would make her the aggressor, sacrificing the moral high ground she had just established. But she could not retreat, and she could not allow the stalemate to continue. Kyle was playing for time, allowing his own ships to make emergency repairs. She had to find another way to close this. "Argo," she said, "give me a new option. Something that isn't a weapon. Something that is a message." The AI was silent for a moment. The hum of the bridge systems seemed to intensify, the ship itself thinking along with its fleet mind. "There is one possibility," Admiral Argo said slowly. "It is not tactical. It is informational. We can open another bumpus of the ledger. Show him the cost of his prelate's doctrine, not just to us, but to them." The plan formed instantly in Rostova's mind, a perfect and dangerous counter-argument. "Patch me through to Sub-Prelate Kale," she ordered. "Fleet-wide, if he'll allow it. I want every one of his sailors to be a witness to this transaction. We would defeat his army with a truth." The channel opened. Kael's face appeared on the main screen. He was younger than she expected, his features sharp and intelligent, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and desperate pride. "Admiral, you have missed your deadline. Will you meet my terms, or will we die here together?" Neither Sub-Prelate Rostova replied, her voice calm and clear. "You speak of balancing a ledger. I agree. A full accounting is required. But you have only been shown one side of the page." She gestured to Jian. Lieutenant broadcast the data. On every Cathar bridge, a new window of information appeared on their tactical displays. It was not weapon telemetry. It was a recording. It was the complete, unedited sensor logs from the Imperator's will captured by the Reckoning's long-range systems in the moments before its destruction. The logs showed Vorn's order to charge his primary weapon. They showed his clear, undeniable intent to fire on Kepler 186F before his own ultimatum had expired. The logs were time-stamped. The evidence was irrefutable. Prelate Vorn had not been defending Cathar honor. He had been a thug preparing to massacre billions out of pure spite. Rostova had not fired first. She had acted to prevent a planetary sterilization that was already in motion. Your prelate was not a martyr, sub-prelate. Kael Rostova said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence on Kael's bridge. He was a war criminal about to commit an atrocity. His death was not a glorious sacrifice. It was a consequence of his own dishonor. Their justification for vengeance turned to ash. Kael stared at the data, his mandibles working silently. He had been prepared to die for Vorn's honor. But there was no honor here. The human had not just defeated them tactically. She was now dismantling their entire moral framework. He could hear the murmurs on his own bridge. He could feel the certainty of his crew beginning to crumble. They were warriors of the Imperium sworn to uphold a code. That code had just been exposed as a lie. This is a trick, Kael snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. Fabricated data. Your own ship's logs will confirm our readings. Sub-Prelate Argo's calm, synthesized voice added to the broadcast a final, unanswerable counterpoint. The energy signatures do not lie. Check your own records. The truth is already in your possession. The trap was not a field of fire. It was a cage of truth. Kael had nowhere to run. If he fought now, he was fighting to defend a lie. If he retreated, he was admitting the human was right. Rostova saw the conflict in his eyes. Now was the time to offer him a different kind of balance. You asked for a tally. You are right to do so. A great price has been paid today. But you are trying to balance the wrong ledger, she said. This is not about ships or pride. It is about a doctrine that led you here. A doctrine that cost you your commander and a third of your fleet. A doctrine that would have led you all to your deaths defending a crime. A new path must be shown, not just demanded. I will not give you one of my ships. Kael, she stated, her tone softening slightly, shifting from prosecutor to something else. I am going to give you something far more valuable. I am giving you and your crews your lives. I am giving you a chance to return to your Imperium and tell them that the ultimatum doctrine is a failure, that it breeds weakness, not strength, that it leads to ruin, not victory. This was the true offer. Not just their lives, but a new mission, a purpose born from defeat. Take your ships and go home, Rostova said. Record in your public annals that this tactic is a dead end. That is the only tally I require. That is how you will balance this ledger. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Kael was wrestling with the foundations of his entire world. To accept her offer was a betrayal of everything he had been taught. But to refuse was an act of utter pointless self-destruction. His eyes darted from the tactical display to the faces of his crew to the damning evidence on his screen. On a small colony world orbiting a distant red dwarf, a Cathar child was listening to an official Imperium broadcast. The story was of the great Prelate Vorn, who had bravely faced down a fleet of treacherous humans in the Kepler system. The broadcast spoke of honor, of sacrifice, of the glorious strength of the Imperium's will. It was a narrative that had been told 1,000 times before, a comforting story of their own unquestionable might. It was a story that was at this very moment being rendered utterly obsolete. The truth is the only weapon that grows stronger when you give it away. Kael closed his eyes for a single long second. When he opened them, the fire was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He had seen the old way fail. He had seen it burn in the light of a star. He would not follow it into the dark. Human Admiral Kyle said, his voice formal and stripped of all emotion. "Your terms are accepted. We will withdraw." He cut the channel without another word. A collective sigh of relief went through the Reckoning's bridge. It was a soft human sound in the heart of a machine of war. "He's doing it." Gian whispered, her fingers tracing the movements on her screen. "The Cathar fleet is turning. They are plotting jump vectors out of the system." Rostova watched them go, a silent, somber procession of defeated warships. There was no triumph in her, only a profound sense of exhaustion and a grim satisfaction. The lesson had been taught. The cost had been paid. "Argo," she said quietly, "create a new entry in the official Confederation Fleet Archives. Designation: the Kepler Precedent. Note that the Cathar Imperium's ultimatum doctrine was met, challenged, and defeated. Note the method and note the outcome." She looked over at the medical status board. Chief Petty Officer Thorne's indicator was stable. One man injured, 2 frigates with burned-out emitters, and a flagship running on fumes. The price had been blessedly low for a victory of this magnitude. A precedent is a ledger entry for the future. The last of the Cathar warp signatures faded from the sensors, leaving behind only the quiet hum of deep space and the gentle blue-green marble of the planet they had saved. Boro looked up from his console, a wide grin finally breaking through his professional composure. "Admiral, we did it. We held the line." Rostova allowed herself a small, weary smile. "We did more than that, Helm. We drew a new one." The tension on the bridge finally broke, replaced by handshakes, tired laughter, and the palpable feeling of a crisis averted. But Rostova's work wasn't quite done. There was one more piece of accounting to be done. Argo, open a secure channel to the civilian transport Odyssey. I want to speak to its captain. A moment later, a man's haggard, tear-streaked face appeared on her private screen. He was the one who had sent the message about his daughter. "Admiral," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. We saw everything. Thank you. From all of us. Thank you." "You have nothing to thank me for," Captain Rostova said, her voice gentle. "We were just doing our job. Tell your daughter she's going to see those crimson forests." The captain nodded, unable to speak, and cut the connection. That, Rostova thought, was the only victory that truly mattered. The quiet, unrecorded moments of life that were now possible, that had been shielded from the brutal calculus of an uncompromising doctrine. The truest victories are measured in heartbeats, not hull breaches. She stood for a long time watching the planet on the main view screen. The hum of the ship was a comforting presence, the scent of ozone and recycled air, a familiar perfume. The great machine of the fleet was already at work, dispatching repair crews, logging after-action reports, and beginning the slow process of recharging its spent power. The universe was for a moment in balance. Her duty was done. The last Cathar ship vanished from the system registry, its icon blinking out on the tactical map. The angry red lines of the blockade faded to a serene, empty black. The public channel, which had carried her ultimatum to the enemy, now carried a simple message to the 10 billion souls on the world below. Confederation fleet reports. The system is secure. Resume normal operations. Argo's avatar materialized beside her, its cobalt form a quiet sentinel. "The ledger is balanced, Admiral," it stated. Rostova nodded, looking at the reflection of her own tired face in the dark glass of the view screen. The lesson had been a costly one to teach, but a necessary one. Some ideas were too dangerous to be allowed to grow, too rigid to be allowed to stand. They had to be broken so that something better could take their place. Doctrines are just cages we build for ourselves, Argo. Sometimes you have to show someone the key is in their own hand. We didn't destroy an enemy today. We just reminded them that the universe is bigger than their rulebook, and that some accounts can only be settled with understanding, not with blood. Their doctrine was a period. Humanity offered a comma.